Tomorrow, the head of NATO lands in Canada, and a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on the agenda. We asked the defense minister or his parliamentary secretary for an interview on concerns arising from all this new data, but they declined our request. We are, however, now joined by two of this country's most knowledgeable voices on defense, former Chief of Defense Staff, General Tom Lawson, and former Commander of the Canadian Navy, Vice Admiral Mark Norman. Hi to both of you. Very good to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. General Lawson, we've met, the three of us, even on a number of occasions to talk about this data in the past. I think that the way I characterized it off the top was new data, old story. How much pressure do you feel from an international reputational perspective is on Canada right now, given how many allies are not just planning to meet it, but going to meet that target this year?
Yeah, I think Canada recognizes now that we've been called out. We were amongst a good group of laggards in the past. Most of those laggards have caught up. Canada has done some catching up, but we leave a long distance between ourselves and 2% of GDP with no real plan to get there. Everyone from senators in the States to friends in NATO are all looking for more from Canada. And so far, although there are some hints from the defense minister, nothing from the highest levels of government indicating that a plan is underway to show how we will get to 2%.
Yeah, to General Lawson's point, Vice Admiral Norman, we've got sort of like open musings from the defense minister about what might get us to 2%, but no explicit commitment on behalf of himself or the prime minister or anybody else really in the top levels of government. What's your impression of that?
Yeah, so as General Lawson indicated, I think part of the frustration here, notwithstanding the time that's lapsed since this started, is the absence of a concrete plan. And I think that's really what both the machinery of NATO and our key allies are looking for. And the minister, ultimately, there's really only a couple of ways to play this. Canada can double down on the reasons why it believes it's special and therefore doesn't need to meet the 2%, or it delivers a concrete plan, or it finds some middle ground where perhaps there are a few more government announcements that are in the offing that were not in the latest defense policy update that could allow them some maneuver space to get between the 1.7-ish and 2% target. But I think they're still going to be criticized for not meeting the requirement for a clearly articulated plan.
General Lawson, I hope you're about to come back because somehow your screen has paused, but I'll voice my question while hopefully that gets fixed. And ask you, essentially jumping off what Vice Admiral Norman said, what your anticipation is from the federal government, because they haven't kind of tried to play that middle ground for a while. We want to meet 2%. We've got a plan now to get to 1.76, which some analysts testified yesterday before committee may not even be coming to fruition because of different calculations. But in any event, putting that aside for a moment, but the refusal has been essentially to articulate getting past 1.76 to 2%. Do you anticipate that changes?
Yeah, I really do. I think what has probably happened is that the government realizes it has not prepared Canada rapidly enough for the increases that would be required. Therefore, they need to look at ways to raise money, if they're going to be honest about this, raise money to move ahead. And it could either be done, as Admiral Norman was saying, by doubling down on a large buy that the minister seems to be hinting at, or smaller buys around Canada that reinvest in monies that are going to stay in Canada. NATO really doesn't care. They trust Canada that when if we're going to put the money in, we'll look after it going to the right places to make Canada a better force than it is right now. But the idea that Admiral Norman is talking about doubling down on the position we're in right now, and that is feeling good and strong in a point of view that we can continue to be a laggard, just isn't going to hold water if we want to be the country that we want to be, a good ally and a good member of discussions that matter around the world. To do that, we're going to have to up our game to 2% and beyond.
I'll follow up in a moment with Admiral Norman, but I just wanted to follow up with you as well, because I spoke to someone who replaced you many years later, General Wayne Eyre, as he was on his way out this weekend for his final interview before he moves on to retire. And he was kind of, no holds, wasn't holding anything back and very explicit about his feeling that Canada is unprepared as a result of what we're talking about to meet the threats that exist right now. Do you agree with his assessment?
Well, I do. General Eyre, of course, has all of the intelligence that they're no longer feeding me or Admiral Norman. But just by reading in the paper these days about adversaries around the world and the precarious position that NATO and the United States find ourselves in, is enough to allow us to imagine what's causing such great worry for General Eyre. And I actually think Canadians are picking that up as well. I think this can be a plank for one of the parties in the coming election in the next little while. If the Liberals seize it, which is not a typical Liberal plank in past elections, then they might take the upper hand over the Conservatives. But I think the Conservatives may be developing a plan that would make it very clear that we would be getting to 2% in a more rapid time frame that so far has been divulged.
Yeah, that would be interesting because so far all they've said is that they would aim to meet that, but they haven't been explicit about in what way or over what period of time. Admiral Norman, I wanted to conclude and ask you about a different story, if you don't mind, that has been developing throughout the week, and that is the presence of a Canadian naval ship in Cuba alongside some Russian ships. The defense minister defended, no irony intended there, the decision and said it was based on feedback from the Navy. Does it make sense to you that we have a presence in Cuba alongside Russian ships?
Well, yes, but not quite in the context that you described it, because you're making it sound like we're there as good buddies. And in fact, that's not the case. This would have been planned quite robustly through U.S. Southern Command, who are responsible for that area of operation. They would have coordinated with Canada and said, hey, have you got any assets that we could put into play, in essence, to counterbalance? I'm not talking platform for platform here, but in terms of presence. So, this is a very sophisticated chess move. The Russians are trying to demonstrate an out-of-area presence in the Caribbean. It's really important that the nations of the Western Pacific, the Western Atlantic, the United States, Canada, and others are demonstrating that this is our backyard and you're not just going to waltz in here without us paying attention. So I think the presence was much a notification of the fact that the United States and Canada are paying attention. I have no doubt there was probably some intelligence activity going on during that visit. And I think this is a bit more sophisticated than it's been characterized in the media.
Yeah, let me ask you, because a lot of that characterization is also derived from the opposition's criticism of the government, where they essentially accuse them of putting the ship there to celebrate something in Cuba or celebrate some sort of tacit alliance with Cuba. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, Vassy, you and I have discussed these types of things at length. When we start politicizing events like this is when the conversation starts to come off the rails somewhat. I would say that criticism is as hollow, perhaps, as the Minister of Global Affairs' admission that she didn't know anything about it. This would have been coordinated with, at least with her department, whether she knew personally or not. So this didn't happen by accident. And I think fundamentally it's a good thing for Canada, particularly in the context of our relationship with the United States for continental defense.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. I appreciate both of you making the time for some great analysis, as always. Thank you so much, Vice Admiral Mark Norman and General Tom Lawson.